everyone, and welcome to the June edition of 3030. I am Pat Reinhardt, and today we are going to be talking about many, many things, some important and some kind of important. The SEO stuff is important, the personal stuff really isn't. But at the end of the day, what we're going to be talking today is about Google's page experience update. This is something that was pre-announced very, very much into the future. There is a lot happening, with that. This is something that's not going live until 2021, but they pre-announced it anyway, and here we are. But I'm going to talk about what that entails, because there's some things that are not new, but there's certainly one thing that is very new. We're going to be talking about, Google still hating guest blogging, things that you should do that if you are guest blogging so that it's done properly. Again, we're going to be talking about disavowing links. I saw an article out there, a few articles covering this, and again, we've talked about it before, but I want to go through it again because it's still something I get a ton of questions about. We're going to be talking about spam. I came across something super interesting, just a cool conversation about what was happening. What was happening there and everything. So that's something as well. And also we're going to be talking about Google My Business, pulling data from Facebook. This is something that was just noticed, and how we should not go too nuts about this. But let's get into it because we only have 30 minutes. Number one, Google's page experience update will be launching in 2021. Why on earth would they announce something so far in advance? So what happened? For the most part, on May 28th, this was just at the end of last month, just before we met. Google announced, a new algorithm update that would focus on a site's on-page experience, named the Google Page Experience Update, fittingly. So from this, the thing to know is that you have time. If you feel that there is something that is in this box, which I'll explain in a second, that does not work for you, that is definitely something that you should, look towards. But for the most part, a big part of this is that AMP is actually no longer required to show up for top stories on mobile. That's one of the nuances here that a lot of folks, we're a little confused about, and that the webmaster article didn't cover well enough, I guess I could say. But for the most part, this was something to be super clear about. So for the top stories carousel on Google on mobile, it used to be that AMP was required to show up in that. You were required. Moving forward, AMP will not be required for that. So if you're someone who gets a lot of traffic on your AMP pages or something from that or you believe from that carousel, this is something to be, to note that Google, if folks that don't have AMP enabled or AMP built into their site will have just as much opportunity to show up there as folks with AMP. And again, the things that go into this update, you can see here that there are 3 areas that they are calling core web vitals. Two of them are things that everyone should be familiar with because they're in the PageSpeed Insights test. One is the largest contentful paint, which is LCP, and the first input delay. So those are things that have been around forever. This is how Google, matches up how fast the page moves, how much it loads up, and any lag that has on it. The new thing here, which I'll show an example of in the next slide, is the cumulative layout shift, or CLS. And that is put into a bucket called visual stability. Now, that is something that is new. And what it is, and again, hopefully the animation or the next slide, but basically, if you have elements on your site that shift around when certain things are clicked, and it creates a bad experience for folks, that is going to start to work against you, starting in January of next year. And I believe they said it was going to be rolling out in January. So that's something to think about. Other factors are mobile friendliness, safe browsing, if you're secure, if you don't have no intrusive interstitials, and all of that is going into this bucket, for search signals for page experience. But the top 3 are being bucketed into something called core web vitals. And again, the largest contentful paint and the first input delay should not be news to anybody. These are things that Google has been measuring, and we have had access to measure for a very long time because they've been in the PageSpeed Insights test. The visual stability is the new one, and that's something where if things are shifting around in a weird way on your site and it creates a bad experience for the user in Google's eyes, that will start to work against you. Now, again, not new factors, page speed, mobile friendliness, security, interstitials. These are things that we've certainly talked about on the program for many years, but also things that, everyone who's involved in SEO should know. If you don't have a mobile-friendly site, it is 2020. Get a mobile-friendly site. I don't think anyone on here doesn't have that, but at the end of the day, heed the warning. Google had Mobilegeddon 100 years ago, and this is something where you have to make sure that page speed. Everyone's been talking about having a fast site for many, many years. Security. You have to make sure your site's secure. You have to make sure that anyone, especially e-commerce sites or anyone taking credit cards or things of that nature on their sites, you have everything is secure. No one is putting in their personal information or credit card information into a non-secure field. Intrusive interstitials, if you have something that pops up and blocks the entire screen, that's not a good experience. Google's been dinging sites for that for a very long time. So again, that is something to take into account. And let's see. Yes, the animation works. So for the most part, this is what they're talking about for the cumulative layout shift. As you can see here, this would be an example of a e-commerce site where someone's saying go back, and then they click on submit my order, and they accidentally buy something because this thing on top, this box on top appeared. And this is something that's super interesting. Number one, because again. And it's super interesting, but it's very much not new. And anyone who's been listening to the program for a while knows that I have described Google as a bully many times in the past, right? But they're a thoughtful bully. And I mentioned it before, but Mobilegeddon, the update that they pre-announced almost a year in advance to get your site mobile-friendly, or you will stop ranking well, or you won't rank as well in the SERPs. That was the first time that Google actually stepped into the experience on a site and the actual design of a site. And if you Google Mobilegeddon, I think my article pops up on Search Engine Journal of the breakdown of it, or my interpretation of it, and how that was a very important update. Even though it didn't, when it rolled out, there weren't many, there wasn't like this big flash thing that happened when it rolled out. Everyone made their sites mobile-friendly for the most part after that, so that when this rolled out, there wasn't these huge ranking shifts because Google told us so much time in advance. And that was the first time that they really bullied us into doing something. You can say that Penguin and Panda back in the day, it's like, yeah, you had to make better content. Yeah, you had to stop link building or doing link building in a shady way. Those were always things that were going to continue to evolve. But Google had never stepped foot into people's designs before. This is just the next evolution of this. And a couple of years ago, I did a presentation at, I can't remember what conference it was, and I started talking about, actually, I think it was probably at C3, and I started to talk about the experience-centric web, right? And that's what this is. This is all coming to pass. And this is not me giving myself a pat in the back because, no one's crystal ball works. But for the most part, this is Google moving into the experience and design and how people interact with your site even further, right? And this impacts everybody. This is another thing to note. This is not an industry-specific thing. Even though this example is clearly an e-commerce example or some type of e-commerce example, this will impact everybody. If you have weird things happening on your site moves like garbage, or you have a lot of different things that are not working for the site, like security, like half the site is secure, half the site isn't. I just got off the phone with someone earlier who's having that issue that they didn't even know about, so we're going to help them correct that. But again, this thing does not see vertical. This update does not see industry. This update is going to impact everybody's site in some way. The question becomes, how much will it impact, right? Because I go back to Mobilegeddon, and I go back that a lot of this makes sense because they've been pushing us to make better experiences for years. But the big question that I've been getting is, how much will this impact? And I go back to Mobilegeddon, where when they rolled that out, they gave everybody so much time that people actually listened, thankfully, and they made their sites mobile-friendly when they weren't mobile-friendly. So all of this is, Google, if my guess is if they are pre-announcing this and they are giving us this much time, then we must heed this warning. That this means I think that slower sites are going to get dinged. I think page speed will probably be one of the least, like impacted because it's an important factor now. But I think, page speed is very nuanced, as most people on this, on this call know. There's a lot that can go into it. It's not necessarily as easy as everyone thinks just to update and make things faster, but it's definitely an effort that everyone listening should start thinking about right now. Make sure you go in and you understand at least why your site moves slow if it does slow and what you can do to get it. And if you can't get people to buy in or you can't get the tech resources, behind you to get this stuff done, use this presentation. Go to Search Engine Roundtable. They have a great article breaking down. Use the Webmaster blog thing, and then go to the Mobilegeddon article I wrote for Search Engine Journal, and let those and kind of use that as ammunition, because this is important. When Google pre-announces something like this so far in advance, I think it's going to have an impact, right? And I think the cumulative layout shift is interesting. So if you feel that you've ever had anything wonky on your site that you've wanted to fix for a while, fix it now. And then when it comes to how people interact with your site and the speed of it, and also mobile friendliness, security, interstitials, anything that makes you uncomfortable, do that audit now. Take the time and do it now so that you have enough road to get this work done. Because I believe that this actually will have a larger impact than Mobilegeddon did, because I think a lot of the stuff in here is harder to fix. It's easy to build a mobile-friendly site. It really is, you know what I mean? If you have the budget to do it, but really it's easy to make that decision. Oh yeah, we're not mobile-friendly. Let's make a site that's mobile-friendly. These are a little bit more nuanced. So this is something that you're definitely going to want the time to think through and get through. So just something to keep in mind as we move on. So going into the other stuff, Google still hates guest blogging, which should be absolutely no news to anybody, but I'm making it news anyway. For the most part, John Mueller, came out and said, and the big thing here is that what is guest blogging? Just for anyone who doesn't know, guest blogging is when you have a guest or someone else write an article on your site, and typically they link back to their site from the article on your site, and then you write an article on their site, and they link back to the article from that. So it's a symbiotic link building, tactic. Again, back in the day, this was a very popular way to build links until Google realized that people were building links using it, and people were paying each other to do that. So, of course, the minute that people start to spam a good thing, you're kind of done from there. So Google years ago actually said that any guest blog that you have, you can drop the link in. That has nothing. It's not that you can't write the content, but you should follow that link back to that site. And for the most part, this question was asked again, was brought up again. And for the most part, what he said was that, essentially, he said essentially the link is within if the link is within the guest post, it should be no follow, even if it's a quote-unquote natural link you're adding here. For what it's worth, none of this is new, and I'm not aware of any plans to ramp up manual reviews of this. We catch most of these algorithmically anyway. And then someone asked, even in the byline, say I have an author page on my site, or to the domain name if writing as an org. That seems like a natural link to me. And John said, yes, even there. So really, any type of guest post that you're doing, regardless of how you're linking to it, or linking out of it, should be no followed. Why is this a big deal? Again, this comes back to shady link building practices, and everyone knows my thoughts on link building. I'm not a fan of it. I think it's a large waste of time in most cases. But if you do, but there are natural ways to do it that makes sense. If you create good content that's linkable, people link to it, right? And I know, listen, there's a lot of folks out there who are like, hey, listen, Pat, we have to do this, especially for local, like local or regional folks. It's very important to do this. And I'm not saying that that's not true. And again, not saying that links are not important. I'm saying that the time that's typically put into it, usually results in things like this. Google usually catches it, and sometimes when Google makes one of these updates, you could have spent. I know folks who spent years, doing link building, and then when Penguin hit, that whole business went away. I mean, all those years of work were gone and were caught. And Google has gotten very good at this, right? And I got killed on LinkedIn, by the holidays because I had put on, I had said that link building is a waste of time. And I had a lot of people, and ultimately that post got taken down because so many people marked it as offensive, which I find very funny. But, that's why, but it's all good. But at the end of the day, this is one of those things where if you are doing something like this, you have to follow these links. You have to follow these links because Google views this as a shady link building practice, and you have to be careful. The last thing everyone wants is a manual penalty on their site. And Google, and he says, we even catch most of these algorithmically, but they're not planning on ramping up manual reviews because of this. But at the end of the day, this is something that could trigger one, and you don't want that. Believe me, it is not worth it at all. And even there, he went on to to say that, I shouldn't be surprised. There are new people starting on SEO all the time, which is a good thing, and says yay. But it's all years old in the meantime, and nothing has changed there at all. Unless the storm in a teacup triggers a lot of people to start, I don't see a need for web spam team to jump in. And then he said the other thing that is because it's so old, we have a lot of training data for our algorithms. I wouldn't be surprised a large part of those links are just ignored automatically. If all that work is for ignored links, why not just do something useful instead? Again, this comes back to, to their thoughts on link building in general. It's like they catch these things. They catch people doing this. So largely it turns into a waste of time and a waste of a lot of budget in a lot of cases. So moving on from that, speaking of links, talking about disavowing in general again, Marie Haynes, who's an amazing SEO, who has an amazing newsletter that everyone should subscribe to. She was actually, interviewing John Mueller. Again, he stated that it would be really rare that disavowing links would help your site do better algorithmically. Now, for me, a lot of people love disavowing their links. They love making it part of their monthly tasks. Hey, listen, I go in, I look for shady links, and I disavow them. That's totally fine. I mean, it's not going to help you. It's not necessarily going to hurt you either. But at the end of the day, the disavow tool largely doesn't do anything unless you are trying to avoid a manual penalty because someone has bought links or you have bought links and you're worried that Google is going to catch you. But for the most part, that is really what the disavow tool is for. If you have things that were paid for, built unnaturally before your time, however it was, that is when you start to do that. But for the most part, Google catches these things and largely ignores them. Like Google's very good at catching link building. I'm not saying that it doesn't work a lot. I'm not saying that. But at the end of the day, like Google does catch most of these, and you always run the risk of losing a lot of time and a lot of budget to stuff. But at the end of the day, Glenn David put something out where he said, important info about disavowing links. Can you see algorithmic improvement from disavowing, which is what a lot of people think the disavow tool is for, is that if I disavow these links, I am going to see better performance. And that is not the case. John Mueller said, I think that would be really rare. Maybe if our algos are really upset, but I wouldn't expect to see visibility changes. So again, for folks who are out there regularly disavowing, you probably could spend your time better elsewhere unless you were combating against an active link building campaign that you didn't agree with or that you view as shady. So that is something to that's something to take into account. He went on to say that, if you're seeing gains in visibility after disavowing, you are probably seeing the effect of something else and not disavowing links. So again, there are a lot of people who have come back to me after I've made comments about this and said, but when I disavow, I see performance increases. That's probably not because of that. And there are two times disavowing makes sense without manual action. This is straight from John. If you are certain you will get a manual action based on previous building a natural link. Two, if you're really unsure about what Google's algorithms will do and want to be safe. Those are the times. And listen, the regular stuff, maintenance stuff, that might be, if that's peace of mind for you, God bless. Go and do it. Certainly not going to hurt you. But ultimately, just be mindful of how much time you spend in the disavow tool. You might be wasting a lot of time. But again, you guys have to run your own campaigns. Do the way that's simply my opinion. And one interesting thing, this was a cool article that I really enjoyed reading that I came across in Search Engine Roundtable. And basically, it comes down to, no matter how old it is, spam still hurts your site, right? And it was a question that popped up, and today's John Mueller Day, apparently. This guy had asked, if we have sponsored content without having no follow, rel sponsored tag, it might be getting a penalty. All contents are very old, like 3 years, so we must add tags to those pages, or should we add the latest sponsored content for the last 6 months content? So for the most part, what that guy is asking is, for older content, or older spammy content, do we need to disavow it? Do we need to get rid of it? Do we need to redirect it? Do we need to update it? And, for the most part, John said, if parts of your website don't comply with our webmaster guidelines and you want to comply with our webmaster guidelines, then it doesn't matter how old the non-compliance parts are. So what that means is that, if you have spammy content, if you have spammy anything, honestly, it doesn't matter how old it is. It just comes back down to Google, doesn't see age, and that's a lot. I actually had someone ask me about domains the other day, does the age of your domain matter? And, years and years ago, the answer was yes. But really, it was yes because it had built up link equity over time. And that's really why, older domains had more authority. And some people, it did have something to do with, when you registered it back in the day, but that's not a thing anymore. But for the most part, old content, old spammy content is still spammy content, and Google will go through it and view it as spammy content. They don't care when you wrote it. They don't care when it went live. It really comes down to if it's not valuable, they're not going to want people to see it, and they're not going to want to show it in their result pages. So that's something to take into account is that, if you feel that you have, if you feel that there is something that, that is on your site that is spammy, you should get rid of it, or you should update it and make it better. Spam content is not good content. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how old it is, and this is Google confirming that. And lastly, but certainly not leastly, so Google My Business is pulling data from Facebook. So here, one thing that I want to kind of go through is that, so if you go into the knowledge panels right now and you go into maps and things of that nature, you'll see that, Google is actually appropriating data from Facebook to get things like the owner, and other areas, which is interesting because they never have done that before. Typically, GMB is managed by the owners of the company, and if you actively own it and do it right, then you did better, This is Google just trying to fill in the blanks of their own data sets. So it's interesting to see that on Facebook, that they're pulling data from there. It's smart to a degree because, of course, they're pulling it and it's helping their data and their visuals look better. But for the most part, I already got a couple of questions about, saying like, oh, hey, I saw this. Do I need to even manage Google My Business anymore? Should I just keep my Facebook page updated and then Google will just pull all the data from there? And the answer is, oh my God, no. No, completely, continue to manage your Google My Business pages, right? This is just Google loves to appropriate data from other sources. Again, that's what they do with a lot of things so that they can serve more ads and that they can just, be the destination. We all know that that's the, that's the direction that they are heading. So at the end of the day, this is not a call for people to stop managing, stop managing the Google My Business. This is simply just Google trying to fill in the blanks. If you own a brick and mortar business, if you own, something that people need to get to on Maps, you should be 100%, 100,000% managing that yourself and making sure everything is in a good place. So this is just, again, and also the other thing is that, social signals have nothing to do with ranking signals. And I think there are a lot of people, and again, I say this all the time, but I have to remember that there are a lot of people who are just getting into SEO and they don't know the nuances. But if you have a lot of likes on Facebook or a lot of, followers on Twitter, that has nothing to do with how well your website ranks. It has nothing to do with that. So this is just Google pulling data from another source. You should be actively managing both. You should be manually, managing both, of course, depending on how big and how many you have. But at the end of the day, this is not a call to say hey, I'm done with Google My Business. I don't really want to go there. But so for the most part, should you be doing something? Not really. Just keep doing what you're doing. For the most part, a lot of comments came back in, just oh, you're going to have people who are, are just going to be, we're going to get, less, correct data because they're going to be pulling it from Facebook. But for the most part, while those comments have merit, you should just continue doing what you're doing for Google My Business. Continue to manage it yourself. Continue to monitor it yourself. Continue to use the data in a good way. So at the end of the day, that is just something that came up. And the reason I even put this in here is because I got a few questions about this, which is just do I have to stop managing and they'll just pull from Facebook? And the answer is oh my God, no. Just keep doing what you're doing on both sites. Again, this is Google filling in the blanks, in their data set with other people's data, which is what they do. So at the end of the day, please, 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 this is not a call to stop managing your Google My Business account. And with that, we have reached the end. We have a couple of questions. If anyone else has any other questions, let me know. But summer is here officially. Long Island is opening, and I just want to say happy birthday to my son Jameson. I am very lucky because he was born the day before my 30th birthday, which means everyone leaves me alone on my birthday. So I'm excited for him, and hey, I'm excited for myself too. But everyone, thank you for joining me today. I'm going to answer the couple of questions that we got. So first one is unparsable data from SD markup a bad thing for pages? The answer is yes. In my opinion, again, is that when you have anything that's unparsable, you have anything that could be viewed as an error. It's never a good thing. Google will come through and typically views that stuff. If it's broken, they'll mostly ignore it. But you really don't want something in there that's not parsable, and that's not something that Google can ingest unless there's a really good reason to do so. So for the most part, I would say yes. That is a bad thing, and you should absolutely correct that if it is within your power. Now, if it is not within your power and it just is something that's like, hey, listen, this is here for X reason, then hey, listen, it is what it is, right? But I would imagine that anything that Google would view as a warning or an error or something that's not parsable, they probably would frown upon. So I would definitely fix that if you can. Another question here: how can I audit my site for the cumulative layout shift? Okay, so again, going back, the cumulative layout shift is when you have those weird, and I'll go back to it right now, is when you have those weird experiences on your site like this. So for me, this is something that I'm still kind of thinking about as well, because a lot of people have asked, like, how can I easily go through my site and find things like this? One way that I'm thinking of is that, when things like this happen, I would imagine that someone called the company or chatted the company to complain about it. So I would probably scour your customer service folks or any type of documentation you have about errors on the site or problems on the site, and that's a good way to kind of pinpoint them, especially if they're from as recent as possible, to make sure that they make sense. But for the most part, that's the way that I'm thinking of it first, to start an audit, is to look through like customer service and any complaints about the site or any bugs that have been reported on the site. Outside of that, it's probably going to be a little manual at that time. So for the most part, that's one thing that you could do. Last question is that are there any backlinking practices you do recommend pursuing? It's a really good question. And listen, I know I dump on link building a lot, but I'm not saying that there's no value in it. It's just making sure that's something that you can spend, that when you do spend time on it, that it does well. One of the ways that I think is really good is start writing for the community and start writing for people, so that so things that happen. So that you're writing on a third-party site, but it's actually getting linked back to your site. That's the best way, and that's the way that I like to do it. I write for Search Engine Journal. I write for other publications, and when I go into folks, I'm like, hey, listen, every company has one expert in your field, right? Everyone has there's wisdom trapped in every organization, and what you need to do is unlock that wisdom by going out into the world and writing about it. And I think that is a good way. Every industry and every vertical has publications that people read. So for the most part, that is the way that I view as a really good way to do link building, because you're on a publication's website. They can link. They're linking back. They're linking back to your site because you're an author on that site. It's a legitimate way, and it's a great way to share content. And now it's a little bit of work. It's a little bit more work than going in and paying someone to link back to you. But it's one of the safest ways that you can do. And again, a few years ago, I would have told you to guest blog, honestly, because I still, only halfway agree with Google on this one, because I think that if you do make partnerships within your organization, you guys should be able to swap equity and help each other out if you trust those people. So I don't see that as shady, but I understand that why Google did, because a lot of people, exploited that. But for me, it's going out and sharing your wisdom and sharing it with publications and creating linkable material. And that's something that's really helped me, as I've worked on Conductor.com over the years. I've gotten a lot of our customers to do that, to start sharing their wisdom out into their industries. And then at the end of the day, that's really it. And with that, everyone, we are at the end. Again, thank you so much for joining me. I say this every month. This is my favorite part of my job, and I would not be able to do it without all of y'all. Thank you so much for spending your very valuable time with me, and we will see you next month.